everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. My name is Sejal Satyapura, and I'm a clinical research professional working in research industry for over past 10 years. Um, I have had many friends and family members who have shown interest in pursuing career in clinical research. It definitely has a great potential. There is new drugs coming to the market every day. Lots of pharma and biotech developing new drugs with various potential variety of therapeutic indications. So there is a lot to know about the research world, and I thought this short training series, or you could say just general tips of what is research and how everything works, would be helpful to some people. So I've used web-based resources to create a small slide deck, and I'll walk you through that, and we can get started. Let me share my screen quickly. Okay, so I'm calling it ABCs of ICH GCP, and it's because we are going to start with basics of GCP. So what is clinical research? Clinical research is the comprehensive study of safety and effectiveness of the most promising advances in patient care. In layman language, before any drug comes to the market, you can't just create a formula and give it to any patient, right? So basically, before any drug comes to the market, sorry about that, before any drug comes to the market, it needs to undergo non-clinical studies as well as clinical studies. Now, non-clinical study refers to the study which happens in a laboratory. So, testing on animals, those refers to the non-clinical study. But when it comes to when the humans get involved, first in human study, you will see early phase studies are also called first in human studies. So yeah, anything which gets human voluntary volunteers and subjects involved, those are referred to as clinical studies. Okay. Who can pursue career in research? I usually get a lot of questions. Do you need a degree in XYZ only? Do you need to do GCP courses? Do you need to do masters in clinical research? So loads of questions coming from various people. I would say anyone with background in pharmaceutical sciences, biological sciences, biotechnology, biochemistry, genetics, bioinformatics, food and nutrition, life sciences, all of them have potential to come and provide their skills in clinical research industry. There are diverse interrelated academic backgrounds in research. So there are multiple other cross-functional teams where even, doctors, lawyers, accounting people, contract managers, database developers, all of them can provide contribution to the GCP field. So yeah, don't just think that I have XYZ degree, and I don't think so I can pursue my career in clinical research. You can definitely give it a go. So yeah, that's one of the questions. Different types of roles. Now, this is also where many people stumble. I have been working in clinical operations for years. I started as a clinical trials assistant, so I've listed some startup roles only. So there are clinical trials assistant, project specialist, project coordinator, clinical research associate, associate project managers, and project managers. In farm, there's a cross-functional team called pharmacovigilance group as well, very key, a very important role in monitoring all the adverse events in research industry. So PV specialist, PV managers, those are some roles people can explore. Data management. If you are if you are a person with biological sciences background as well as good expertise in computational languages like Perl, Java, SQL, uh, the latest ones, I do not even know them, and you are more kind of very good at coding, and you want to do something coding in biological sciences, then clinical research is the best field for you. There are requirement of clinical database development for all the projects. So there is a opportunity as a clinical data manager, coder. You could give it a shot to those fields. Anybody with medical MD background, they can obviously become a investigator at site. It's at the hospital itself. They are called principal investigators in ICH GCP terms. But other than that, in a CRO or a pharma biotech, they could potentially apply for medical directors, medical monitors, medical writers, or PV physician roles. Different companies use different slightly different terms. Sometimes some would have a job post called trial physician, so it's differs from company to company slightly, but just explore the company webpage. And at the investigator site, so the hospitals are referred as investigator sites in ICH GCP terms. So you can even try your career in at the hospitals. Obviously, as I mentioned, the doctors they can become principal investigators or sub investigators. Then for nurses, there's a room for clinical trial nurses. There's clinical trials practitioners, study or data coordinators. There's lab coordinators. Many different roles, and I can do a separate session dedicated just to different types of role in industry if anybody would like to explore more, and we can take it from there. Yeah. So now, what is ICH-GCP? So the full form stands for International Council for Harmonization of Technical Requirements for Pharmaceutical for Human Use Guideline for Good Clinical Practice. Now, if I speak in layman words, anything you need, even if you buy a small toy, you need a manual. It comes with a manual on how to operate it, right? And in the industry, whether it's good manufacturing practice, good laboratory practice, excuse me, or good data management practice, everything needs to have a common guideline, right? Because any data you generate in research, sorry, it's going to be used worldwide. So you need to have a global guideline so that all the researchers across worldwide they could use the same guidance. So that is ICH-GCP. Basically, it's going to tell all the researchers across the world to say what to do, what not to do, what is ethical, what is not ethical, what are the requirements of GCP. And if you do not follow these guidelines, then your research data could not be potentially used, or even the drug might not get approved if these are not followed. So good clinical practice is an international ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, recording, reporting trials that involve the participation of human subjects. Compliance with this standard provides public assurance that the rights, safety, and well-being of trial subjects are protected, consistent with the principles that have their origin in Declaration of Helsinki, and that clinical trial data are credible. I've provided a quick reference to this GCP guideline. That is the main source of my slide deck. You guys can refer to this web link, and it's very useful as well. Moving on to phases of clinical trials. So now, any drug molecule, say a scientist has found, right, for XYZ indication, that, hello, I've developed this molecule. I think it's really going to work for XYZ cancer. Now, you can't just move on and administer that in any patient, right? And you can't even do that in a mass population. So clinical trials are, divided in various phases. Phase 0 is not very commonly used. It's usually mentioned as first in human trials, and the population is just about 10 to 20 people. And the testing occurs at a very low dose of treatment to check if it's harmful or not. because any drug, before you know that, oh, it's going to do some good, you definitely want to know that it's not going to do something really bad, right? So all these phases of clinical trials are divided to identify drugs safety as well as efficacy. Efficacy is how good the drug works for the therapeutic indication it's meant to be for. Now, then comes phase one studies. These are sometimes divided as phase 1A or phase 1B, and these are often dose escalation studies. What I mean by dose escalation is it starts with a smaller dose. Patients are divided into cohorts, and then if that small dose is safe enough, then you enroll more patients into the next cohort, which are administered a slightly higher dose. Okay, so that's how these early phase studies work. And the population is about 20 to 50 people, and that way you try to identify a dose level which is safe as well as efficacious. Okay, then comes phase two, where the population is about 100 subjects. And here, usually, you do not identify the dose, there is no dose escalation here. You're trying to identify, whatever dose you have decided that this therapeutic dose is efficacious as well as safe enough in the phase one study, you bring that to phase two, administer to a larger population, and try to gather more data, whether the drug is actually working or not in a wider population. Then comes phase three, and that's large number of patients again, thousands of patients. And this is to really explore a wide range of people, because obviously there are so many parameters, right? One drug which works for one patient, not necessarily it's going to be working for other patient, because there is genetics and other comorbidities which might impact efficacy of drug. How it works in one patient may not really work for the other patient. And then comes phase four study, which is again in the larger population. And most of the times, once the drug enters phase four study, the sponsors can usually apply for drug approval from the regulatory bodies as well. So now, remember the web link I mentioned in a few slides back? So it's a glossary of various terms used in clinical research, and I have copy pasted the content from that website, but I'm going to try to explain all of these definitions in layman terms, okay? So, adverse drug reaction. Now, what is this and why we need it, okay? So, all the like I mentioned, we need to know the safety of all the drug. Now, how do you know that? You can't just give drug to one patient and just say that, oh, okay, it's working fine. No, you need to gather data for all the patients you have delivered that drug to, and that just does not happen within a day. If your drug, say for example, your therapeutic dose, you need to give it for 6 months to that patient. You need to monitor the adverse drug reaction or adverse event of that patient for 6 months and few more months, because some of the reactions can occur lately. Okay, now what do we record in clinical research? So one, the adverse event which has occurred, it could be related to the drug, and two, it could not be related to the drug, but you gather both of the information. Okay, say for example, I'm a clinical trial patient and I have I've got a drug today, and by the time I came home, I started feeling sick and stuff. So now my investigator will bring me in to the clinic again for evaluation. What, what it could be potentially related to. Am I having the fever I have? Is it because of viral, or is it a potential side effect of the drug? So the investigator will evaluate that. Okay. And say, for example, whilst just coming out of the hospital, I tripped over and I had a fall and I bruised my knee. Now, again, it's possibly just because I tripped over. So that is that event, the fall gets recorded as adverse event, but it gets recorded as not related to the trial drug because I just fall and bruised my knee, right? But if that other event I mentioned, the fever, if I do not have any viral, additional lab tests have been done, then yes, this particular event fever is possibly related to the drug, and there is a sponsor database where they need to add this information. It gets recorded over there. Okay, so that's adverse drug reaction and adverse event. Okay. Applicable regulatory requirements. Now, regulatory, it's a very big term and a very important term. Any trial in any country, before it could get started, it needs a regulatory approval. You can't, scientists cannot just develop a molecule and say, hello, patients, please come in. I want to do a phase 1 study. No, if you whatever that new molecule the scientist has developed, they create a non-clinical study data from that, and they need to submit some analysis to show that, oh, this one has a potential and we want to start a first in human study in XYZ country. Now, all of the countries have separate regulatory bodies. So wherever the sponsor wants to say the sponsor wants to open that study in US, they need to submit application to FDA. In UK, they need to submit application to MHRA. In India, it gets submitted to CDESCO. So all the countries have their own regulatory bodies, and it needs to get reported to all of those bodies. Luckily, in EU, just about a year ago, they uh, uh, combined application system, CTIS, it's called CTIS. You can Google and find out more information. So it's a cumulative applications for all the countries within the European Union. So the sponsor can do just one application, and that application gets disseminated to all the countries where the sponsor wants to open their clinical trial. Okay. So whenever you open your trial in these particular countries, obviously you have to seek for regulatory approval as well as comply with all the regulatory requirements for that country to conduct the trial. Approval, as I mentioned, regulatory approval is one of the requirements to get any clinical trial started. There is another approval you need. It's called institutional review board approval, or in some countries it's referred to as ethics approval, or international ethics, sorry, not international, institutional ethics approval, IEC approval. So the term varies little bit, but just besides the regulatory approval, there is this review board who makes sure all the patient facing documents are reviewed, protocols are reviewed, and they make sure they are reviewing it from the legal perspective, from the ethics perspective, that you are not the sponsor is not compromising with any of that. Okay. So that is another approval. Audit. What is an audit? So basically, you have a manual to do. Oh, okay, you have the GCP manual to make sure you do follow XYZ guidelines. Now, how do you know whoever the companies or the vendors involved in the clinical trial are, they are doing it the right way? You need to check, right? And your examination sheet gets checked by a teacher, because you have done the reading, but you have done the correct reading and given the right answer. That needs to be checked. The same concept applies to clinical research. There are audits which can be conducted by sponsors. It can be conducted at the hospitals, any vendors which sponsor hire, say there is a external laboratory hired by the sponsor to conduct certain testings, or do the sample storage and everything, or some other vendor, say for example, for gathering all the imaging data, then sponsor can conduct audit at any of these vendors or the investigator sites, because they want to make sure they are following their own SOPs, the sponsors manuals, and ICH, GCP, and any other regulatory requirements. Okay. Audit certificate, it's a straightforward that documentation to say that audit had taken place. Now, remember these words. If it's not documented, it did not happen. You will hear this a lot in GCP industry. So basically, anything which happens, it needs to be documented. And most of the companies have tools and report formats to get it documented. Okay. Audit report, it's a detailed report, which is created by sponsors auditor after the audit has taken place, and it's excuse me, it's reviewed by the sponsor team members, and whatever the findings are, the vendor or the investigator site has to work on it and improve their processes. If there were any critical findings, the sponsor even has a right to terminate the trial at that particular site. So depending on what type of findings were identified, the the sponsor decision goes along. Audit trail documentation that allows reconstruction of the course of events. So what is this audit trail? Now, if I tell you in simple language, um, we'll come across a word called source document soon, but we need to make sure that anything that is documented, it has an audit trail on. Say, for example, a patient's vital signs were taken by a nurse. Okay. So, in research, once the vital signs were taken, that particular nurse have to, that particular nurse have to put on her initials at the end and also put the date, whatever it is. 2017. So something like this. Let me put an example for you guys. Sorry, but you won't be able to see it. But yeah, in short, whatever paperwork is handwritten, if it's handwritten and it's created by a nurse or a doctor, they need to make sure they sign it and date it, or add their initial and date it. And if, say, for example, they made a mistake in writing something, say they made an error in writing the blood pressure, and if they want to correct it, they cannot just scribble the whole thing. They have to just make a single line to strike it off, then write the correct value and add their initial and date to say that, okay, this was recorded in error and that's the correction. Okay. Blinding and masking. Now, some of the trials are also called blinded trials. It could be single blinded or double blinded, and where these type of trials are designed by some of the sponsors to really reduce the bias and actually say that, to compare the drug with a placebo or a comparator, and to identify that the drug is really working. And this type of blinded trials are usually at late phase 2 or phase 3 studies. Okay. Case report form. So the case report form is a printed optical or electronic document designed to record all of the protocol required information to be reported to the sponsor on each trial subject. I know, a lot of information, but so CRF, uh, originally, many years ago, it used to be paper format, but now it comes in electronic format in form of databases, so it makes life easier for everyone. But what it is and why it is. So the CRF is basically you are gathering all the patient's information for your trial relevant data only. Okay. Now, at the hospital, there are patients' medical notes where it has patients' personal information as well, like name, date of birth, address, everything. Now, all of these details are confidential to the sponsor, and the sponsors cannot collect medical notes as just part of for gathering clinical trials data. So they have to develop these case report forms. There's a specialized team, data management team, who do this, And whatever data is collected in medical notes, that data needs to be entered in this case report form, and this is the responsibility of the investigator site staff. Okay. So this CRF, originally it used to be paper CRFs. So they used to complete it and send a scanned copy to the sponsor, or vice versa. Whatever the sponsor policies, keep a scanned copy at site and originally sent to the sponsor. But now these days, to make life easier, it's ECRF. It's called ECRF. So all the data what is gathered in medical notes, it gets entered into the electronic CRF. So now this CRF has unique patient identifier, the trial subject number, to link it to that particular trial patient in the medical notes. So all of the confidential data is not shared. Clinical trial. What is a clinical study? We've walked through this already, so I'll leave that. Clinical trial study report. So once the trial is concluded, all the information is gathered, sponsor has to create a clinical study report in order to explain everything, what happened in the trial, what was the adverse events, what is the efficacy of how much efficacy of the drug is noted. And there is a panel of biostatisticians, medical team, clinical operations team, data management team, pharmacovigilance team, who together creates this report, and it gets submitted to regulatory authorities. And this study report is important, one, to move on to the next stage of the trial, and two, to also to seek approval of that particular drug. Okay. Next comes the comparator project. Remember, we discussed about the randomized clinical trial. So sometimes some of the trials where there is a randomized trial, what they will do is there is a trial drug, and there is another, it's either a placebo drug or it's a drug which is already approved for that particular clinical use. Okay. So the trial is conducted to do the comparison that, hello, our drug is working better than whatever the standard of care drug is, or the drug is working better than a placebo. Okay. Compliance is adherence to all trial related requirements, GCP requirements, and applicable regulatory requirements. So everyone has to comply with it, even the sponsors, investigator sites, CROs, or other linked vendors, everyone. Confidentiality, as I mentioned, it's very critical to ensure patients' confidentiality is maintained at all the time. So that's why these different tools and databases are developed to ensure the clinical trial data is gathered in a non-confidential manner. Contract. So a written weighted signed agreement between two or more involved parties that sets out any arrangements on delegation and distribution of tasks and obligations, if appropriate, on financial matters. The protocol may serve as basis of contract. So now, when we get hired, what do we get? We get a official contract to say this is your role, this is your responsibilities, and this is your salary. Same applies to clinical trials. There will be a contract between the sponsor and the CRO, sponsor and the site, or the CRO and the investigational site, sponsor and the external vendor, to say scope of responsibilities, what will be their responsibilities, how much payment they will get, and everything. So obviously, because if you don't have a legal agreement in place, you won't be paid for your service. So it's very critical, right? Um, Coordinating committee, a committee that a sponsor may organize to coordinate the conduct of a multi-center trial. It's sometimes referred to as DMC, data monitoring committee, or sometimes it refers to it as a SMC, safety monitoring committee. Depends on sponsor to sponsor. Okay. So basically, there's a committee to review and evaluate the trial data before it's completed. And it could be conducted every few months, or after the enrollment has reached 50%, depending on sponsors' criteria. Coordinating investigator. An investigator assigned the responsibility for the coordination of investigators at different centers participating in multi-center trial. Now, whenever a trial is open in one country, and remember the ethics submission we discussed previously. So, what gets sent to ethics committee in the first application? So you are telling the ethics committee, I want to open this trial in in, say, for example, in UK. I have this 10 investigator sites where I want to open this trial. These are the potential principal investigators of each site. Each site will have their own principal investigator. But Dr. XY, out of these 10 principal investigators, Dr. XYZ will be acting as our national coordinating investigator. Now, they do not really have any uh, major responsibilities as a national coordinating investigator. There's a sponsors, a startup team mainly looking after that, but the main application happens on behalf of that main national coordinating investigator. That applies to all the countries. Okay, so if in case there are any if any meetings are requested from the ethics committee for the discussion of the trial or anything, the coordinating investigator can get invited to answer some of the questions. Okay. Contract research organization, a person or an organization contracted by the sponsor to perform one or more of the sponsor's trial related duties and functions. Now, over the years, um, uh, trial has definitely improved. There have been so much better processes and systems in place to make clinical trials work more smoothly and efficiently. So contract research organizations are these large organizations. Now they these days, the examples are Seniors Health, IQVIA, Parexel, um, you know, um, those are some, Centeract. So all of these organizations, they provide a wide range of services like clinical monitoring services, contracting services, study startup services, pharmacovigilance services. So depending on sponsor's need, they will assign XYZ responsibilities to that CRO. Sponsor can limit this number of responsibilities. It's not necessary that the sponsor has to utilize the whole platter what the CRO is offering. Sponsor will say, I already have my in-house team for pharmacovigilance and medical monitoring. I only need your help for clinical monitoring. So they can just decide that, and the contract gets arranged as per the sponsor requirements. Okay. Direct access. Permission to examine, analyze, verify, and reproduce any records and reports that are important to evaluation of clinical trial. Any party with direct access should take all reasonable precautions within the constraints of the applicable regulatory requirements to maintain the confidentiality of subject identities and sponsors' proprietary information. So, access refers to all these confidential documents of the patients as well as the sponsors document, protocol, investigator brochure, any other sponsor manuals and guidance tools. And, regulatory inspectors can get access to it. Clinical trials monitor or CRA, we refer to in the research industry. CRA accesses patient data, so all of them is parties who have direct access to all of these data. They have the responsibility to make sure the confidentiality are maintained. As in, they do have access to the confidential stuff, but they should restrict those access, review it, and avoid sharing or taking pictures or copies of it. So that's the responsibility. Documentation, all records in any form. I mean, documentation will refer to the patient documents and even the sponsors documents again. And so all records in any form that describe or record the methods, conduct, and the results of the trial, the factors affecting a trial, and the actions taken. Essential documents. You will hear this term a lot. Documents which individually or collectively permit evaluation of the conduct of a study and the quality of the data produced. So there is a this web link which I was referring to. At the end of that document, there's a list of all the essential documents. What documents should lie in this investigator site file? What essential documents are part of the sponsor's trial master file? All of that. So you could walk through that and to get a better understanding of what are the different types of essential documents. GCP, we have discussed this already. Independent Data Monitoring Committee. So it's a committee that may be established by the sponsor to assess at intervals the progress of a clinical trial, the safety data, and the critical efficacy endpoints, and to recommend to the sponsor whether or not to continue the trial. Okay. Impartial witness, a person who is independent of the trial, who cannot be unfairly influenced by people involved with the trial, who attends the informed consent process if the subject or the subject's legally acceptable representative cannot read, and who reads the informed consent form and any other written information supplied to the subject. Now, so it's very complex process, especially the consenting process. And informed consent form or ICF form or consenting, these are one of the very critical element of clinical trial. Okay, if at all any investigator gives the drug to the patient without informed consent, he's in trouble, he or she. So basically, the if because not necessary that all the trial patients are educated or they understand the informed consent language, right? So if that person, trial patient, is not able to understand the informed consent form, then they can have an impartial witness present to make them walk through the make them read that read through the informed consent form and make them understand what it is, what the implications are, everything, so that they can have a better understanding of the informed consent, and what is involved with this trial, and when they can withdraw, or what will happen if they participate in it, what how many visits they have to come to, and all of that. Independent ethics committee, we have walked through it briefly before, but I'll read the definition. An independent body constituted of medical professionals and non-medical members whose responsibility is to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects enrolled in a trial, and to provide public assurance of that protection by, among other things, reviewing and approving, providing favorable opinion on the trial protocol, the suitability of the investigators, facilities, and the methods and materials to be used in obtaining and documenting informed consent of the trial subjects, the legal status, composition, function, operations, and regulatory requirements pertaining to independent ethics committee may differ among countries, but should allow the independent ethics committee to act in agreement with GCP as described in this guideline. Now, Independent Ethics Committee is, a committee combined of medical professional, legal professional, somebody as an ethics representative, and a couple others. So basically, there's a whole panel team reviewing all the documentation of that trial, which consist of like protocol, informed consent form templates, pharmacy manuals, lab manuals, any other patient's advertisement stuff, or any other patient facing materials. Say, for example, there is a questionnaire involved in the trial, all of that. Okay. And it also mentioned investigators. Remember, I mentioned that in the initial application sent to the ethics committee for that particular country, you also have to mention that these 10 investigators will be are selected for the trial in the UK, and these are the addresses, these are the name of the potential principal investigators. And I would like to we have evaluated these sites, and we feel that these are suitable to get our trial started. So that gets submitted to the ethics committee. Okay. Informed consent, a process by which a subject voluntarily confirms his or her willingness to participate in a particular trial after having been informed of all aspects of the trial that are relevant to the subject's decision to participate. Informed consent is documented by means of written, signed, and dated informed consent form. So basically, as we briefly discussed already, no drug can be administered to the patient without this informed consent. One of the very important element of GCP, and it is also important how the informed consent process goes. They need to make sure the trial investigator needs to make sure they explain the patient all the possible treatment options to them, the possibility of this clinical trial. It should be left it up to the patient whether or not they want to participate or not. They need to explain the risk and benefit of the clinical trial to the patient. So I the informed consent form is generally written in a layman terms only, but still there are some medical terms which are not easily understood by the patients. So the doctor has a responsibility to to explain it to the patient. If they have any additional questions, they have to answer those, and after that this informed consent gets signed by the patient. One original copy is given to the patient, and one stays in the investigator side file. And the process of who took the consent, when did they took it, and whether or not there were any questions discussed or not, all of that needs to be documented in the medical notes. In inspection, the act by the regulatory authorities of conducting an official review of the documents, facilities, records, and any other resources that are deemed by the authorities to be related to the clinical trial, and that may be located at the site of the trial, at the sponsors and or contract research organization facilities, or at other establishments deemed appropriate by the regulatory authorities. So now remember these FDA, MHRA, CDSCO, EMA I mentioned earlier. So the all these regulatory bodies, besides doing providing approvals for the trials, they can also knock at the sponsor's door or the investigator site's door for an inspection. Now these inspections are really so important element, and I think it also makes sure that all the sponsors and their affiliated parties are conducting trial as per GCP requirements. So another term you will hear in research industry is you always have to be inspection ready. That means whatever the documentation you are collecting, and creating needs to be sent to the trial master files and stuff contemporaneously, so that you can review everything in real time. Institution, any public or private entity or agency or medical or dental facility where clinical trials are conducted. Institutional Review Board, an independent body constituted of medical, scientific, and non-scientific members whose responsibility is to ensure the protection of the rights, safety, and well-being of human subjects involved in the trial by, among other things, reviewing, approving, and providing continuing review of the trial protocol and amendments, and of the methods and material to be used in obtaining and documenting informed consent of the trial subjects. So again, as I mentioned, IRB, IEC. IRB term is mainly used in the US in particular. In UK, previously they used to refer it as R&D approval. So basically, if I speak about approvals, so obviously there are regulatory approval, then national ethics approval or the international IRB approval, which is like a country level approval. But then also there comes the institutional approval. So from one particular site, they might have additional committee at one investigational site to perform all the reviews of the trials. So even the national ethics approval and the regulatory approvals get sent to this IRB board saying that, hello, our trial has been approved by the ethics committee and the regulatory authority. Now we seek your final approval in order to get started with the trial. So in some countries, the national ethics approval is sufficient, and in some countries, individual sites, there is a requirement to seek approval from individual sites as well at the site level. Okay. Interim clinical trial study report, a report of intermediate results and their evaluation based on analysis performed during the course of a trial. We discussed the IDMC committee or the safety monitoring committee. So it's just the interim trial report, which is generated for the sponsors, committee members to review and discuss the progress of the trial. Investigational product. So the drug which is given to the patients in trials is called investigational product. The name is self-explanatory. It's referred to as IP, sometimes also IMP, investigational medicinal product. So some sponsors use the term IMP as well. Okay. Um, Investigator. So basically, a doctor at the hospital is referred to as investigator. If that doctor is a being doctor delegated to take overall responsibility of the conduct of trial at that hospital, he's called principal investigator. He can have other doctors in his team, and they would be referred as sub investigators. Investigator institution or investigator site, an expression meaning where so basically, the hospital is referred as investigator sites in GCP terms. So it's just that. And investigators brochure, a compilation of the clinical and non-clinical data on the investigational products, which is relevant to the study of the investigational product in human subjects. Now, investigator brochure, mostly referred as IB, is the sponsor's confidential document where they have gathered all the safety information of that particular IP. Okay. And this gets submitted to the regulatory bodies as well as ethics committee. And once the study is approved, it gets shared with all the participating investigator sites and everyone. So in general, they have to update this annually. Any, say for example, a trial is ongoing for 2 or more years, but whilst the trial, whilst the patient comes in, there is going to be new safety data available, right? XYZ, new adverse events or whatever that needs to, so this investigative brochure needs to be updated with the safety information on an annual basis. Okay. And that's the responsibility of the sponsor. Legally acceptable representative, an individual or judicial or other body authorized under the applicable law to consent on behalf of prospective subject to the subject's participation in the clinical trial. So sometimes if the patient is not able to consent on their own, they could have a legally acceptable representative to do that on their behalf. Monitoring, the act of overseeing the progress of clinical trial and of ensuring that it is conducted, recorded, and reported in accordance with the protocol, standard operating procedures, good clinical practices, and applicable regulatory requirements. So we have discussed audit by the sponsors auditors and also the inspections by the regulatory inspectors. Now that too does not happen very often. Okay, it only happens if there are any red flags emerged. Okay. Monitoring, however, it happens on a regular routine basis because, and this is a regulatory requirement and a GCP requirement. And in early phase studies, it happens very frequently. As in, I mean, some can monitoring visits can happen every 3 weeks at the site. So basically, the sponsor or the CRO hires a clinical trials monitor or clinical research associate, commonly referred as CRA. And these CRA are well trained with the protocol and sponsors other study manuals and requirements. And they go on at the investigator site and make sure the doctors and their team are fully trained and competent enough to conduct the trial. And whatever the patient they are enrolling, they are following the consenting process, data collection process as per GCP, and they are complying with the protocol. All of these checks are done by the CRA. Okay, it's a very important job, and they play a very important role in identifying any issues. So whatever, if they identify any issue at the site level, their responsibility is also to retrain them. And after each monitoring visit, a monitoring report is created for sponsors review. And if sponsors see that one particular site has been non-compliant with so many things, the sponsor can even make decision of putting recruitment on hold at that site, or request an audit for a detailed understanding of all the non-compliances and everything, and to assess whether or not there are any critical elements of for all this findings. So that is monitoring report. As I mentioned, it's a written report from the monitor to the sponsor after each site visit, and other trial related communication according to the sponsor SOPs. Multi-center trial, a trial conducted for more than one hospital is called multi-center trial. Non-clinical study, it's biomedical studies not performed on human subjects. We discussed this briefly previously. Opinion, it's the judgment and or the advice provided by the independent ethics committee. The reason it's mentioned opinion is mostly because, in the ethics approval letter, they usually say as we provide favorable opinion for the conduct of your trial, or we provide non-favorable opinion, or there can be also special circumstances where they say we provide favorable opinion if the following conditions will be met. So that's opinion. Original medical record, it's anything which is it's the patient's medical report, lab report or x-ray or CT scan report or anything, the original document, that's a original medical record. Protocol. Now all the trial, all the IP, it's going to have a protocol, definitely. And it's a detailed, you can say, a detailed manual created by the sponsor to guide the investigators with how to when to bring the patient in, what is the inclusion exclusion criteria to bring the patient to our study, what are the possible adverse events which you may expect from these patients, how to report the adverse events, how to collect the data, how to enter it on the ECRF, basically everything. That's how to handle the drug. Everything is mentioned in the protocol. It does. It can have additional manuals related to it, like lab manual, how to collect the samples and send it to the sponsor laboratory, pharmacy manual, how to, manage the clinical trial drug at the hospital pharmacy, how to store it, and everything. Protocol amendment. So this protocol, with time, if sponsor wants to change certain parameters, whether it's the safety information or the way the schedule of events is there, or anything, any content. I'm sorry. Then they they need to officially amend the original protocol, and it's referred as protocol amendment. And this needs to go to the regulatory authorities and ethics committee again. the operational techniques and activities undertaken within the quality assurance system to verify that the requirements of the quality of the trial related activities have been fulfilled. Just the QC control. I'm sorry, I have minor cold, so minor interruptions in between. Randomization, the process of assigning trial subjects to the treatment or control groups using an element of chance to determine the assignment in order to reduce bias. So, as I mentioned earlier, there could be some randomized trials, and how the randomized group will work. It depends on what they have defined in the sponsor protocol. It could be 2:1 ratio or 1:1 ratio. Sorry, I'll conclude this call and continue with another round. So hope you enjoyed the discussion up until now, and I'll come with another round of training video pretty soon. Thank you for watching. Bye, guys.